Well, howdy and welcome back to the workshop. In today's episode, we're gonna go pick up this power hammer in the course of a 5,000 mile, 2-week long road trip. But before we do that, let's thank today's sponsor, which is Factor. Factor is a fun, simple, easy, and fast way to get into clean, wholesome, chef-prepared meals at a very reasonable cost. How it works is you go online, you sign up, you choose your meal plan anywhere between 4 to 18 meals per week. They can accommodate a lot of the dietary restrictions that most folks have because Factor offers a bunch of different types of meals, including keto, calorie smart, chef's choice, vegan, and veggie options, which include seafood, meat, and plant-based meals. And they show up never frozen at your door. You unpack them, throw them in the fridge, and then you're ready to rock and roll. And if we're being honest, that's super nice. Especially for a young bachelor, it's nice to not have to get out all of the cooking stuff all of the time. So in addition to my meals, I also got smoothies and dessert, which was pretty nice. So if you are interested in saving time and still getting good meals, go ahead and go to go.factor75.com/WillStelter120 and enter code WillStelter120 for $120 off. And that link will also be downstairs in the description, so check that out if you don't like hearing me talk. Starting off, I headed down to Casa Grande, Arizona, the home of Travis Wirtz, owner of Wirtz Machine Works and host of the Wirtz Machine Works Hammer-In, one of the best hammer-ins around. Bunch of blacksmiths hanging out, having a grand old time. So the first day was about 18.5 hours of driving. I had a couple stops along the way. I got pulled over. It was great. The hammer-in lasted for 2 days and I learned a lot. Some of my favorite demonstrators and some of the cool people that got to meet were Bob Kramer, pretty much the godfather of modern custom chef's knife making. Bob was also the mentor of one of my main mentors, Daniel O'Malley. I also got to meet Ken Onion, one of my other mentors. He taught Salem Straub how to make knives, and Salem taught me a vast majority of what I know about making Damascus and about making knives. I also got to meet one of my other idols, Owen Wood. He does an unbelievable job on some beautiful Art Deco style folding knives, and got to hang out with a bunch of other friends, Ben Snur, Mike Quesenberry, Rick Hall, Pep Gomez, and some other really awesome people. I know I'm forgetting a lot, but there was a lot of people there and it was a lot. I wasn't able to film a ton there because, well, people paid to go to the event to learn, and so they asked us not to film. After the 2 days of the hammer-in were over, I went through Tucson, hung out with Don Wynn and Will Brigham for a minute, and spent the night at Pep Gomez's place. He's got a beautiful shop and some awesome power hammers, and he knows a lot of things. Check him out on Instagram, Lost Arts Forge. Thank you, Pep. After I left Pep's place in Las Cruces, New Mexico, I spent the night at Jim Poor's shop just south of Abilene. He had Bill Burke there. They're both getting ready for Blade Show Texas and Fort Worth, so we got to hang out with them, talk tools, have a good time. The next morning, Jim and I went for a little bit of a drive, checked out, looked for some hogs. We didn't see anything, but we got to see the sunrise over mid-Texas, some beautiful rolling hills and trees and shrubbery and whatnot. That was quite nice. And then I got to have a quick visit with Owen Wood, who I just met a couple days earlier, and he's got a beautiful, clean, very machine shop feeling knife making studio. He does his forging there and a lot of beautiful machine work for his amazing folders. After that, I headed east to Fort Worth, where I was staying with my friend Eric. Eric owns Pre-Sample Depot. Eric is a Knight's Armament armorer, and he sells all sorts of very, very cool things. If you like cool stuff, you should go check out his website, Pre-Sample Depot, for the Gucciest of all of the shooting gear and night vision and all of the fun stuff. We had a blast playing with guns and knives, and we got to go hunt hogs one night. I got to kill my first hog, which was a great experience under night vision. It was crazy, super fun to walk around and be able to see in the dark really well. After that, it was the knife show at Fort Worth, and I got to hang out with all sorts of cool makers. So the show was super fun. I had just an absolute blast. Alicia Newton, the lady who organizes the Blade shows, did a wonderful job. Thank you, Alicia, appreciate it. And so with the show finished, I grabbed a trailer while I was in Fort Worth, bought it from my buddy Juan, Old Timey Tools on Instagram. I headed on down to San Antonio, or I guess just north of San Antonio, to pick up this bad mamma jamma. Now, how I got this hammer is pretty funny. It actually is almost exactly how I got the other hammer. I was on Instagram, and lo and behold, I see a picture of a power hammer, and what I see is the back of this hammer, and I recognized it immediately. It's a Beaudry No. 2 Champion mechanical power hammer. It wasn't a for sale post. It was just a, hey, I found a Beaudry No. 2. These things are rare as hen's teeth, and they are. These are super, super rare power hammers. And so I immediately inquired if it was for sale. It was actually, I think I put down money on it before I even went and picked up the big hammer. So it's been a long time coming. We got it loaded on the trailer. Andrew Holmgreen, the gentleman who found it originally, he bought it from an artist blacksmith who was also in San Antonio. So we got the hammer loaded up, we had some delicious barbecue, and I started heading north to spend the night in Tyler, Texas. I didn't quite make it there. I blew out a tire going 80. That was good. Thank goodness I had an extra anvil in the bed of my truck, and I was able to block up the trailer and get the spare on there. It wasn't the right size spare, but the bolt pattern fit, and so I ended up spending the night just south of Temple, Texas at a cheap motel there. It was bad. I found a cockroach. It was bad, but I just crashed, woke up early in the morning, and got headed to Tyler, Texas to hang out with my good friend Morgan Wade. Morgan is a professional BMX rider, and he's a shooter, and he loves Jesus as well, and his family is just wonderful. So we had a great time hanging out, did a little bit of work on the trailer, got the lights up and running, and all sorts of stuff. So after getting to hang out with Morgan for a little bit, I hopped in the truck, and I started to head northwest to Clarendon, Texas, where our good friend Ben Snurr lives, and that's where we filmed the Anvil Hammer video. It was supposed to be a 6-hour drive. It took like 9 hours or something like that, and I was making about 8.5 to 9 miles per gallon in my little Tacoma while I was towing this guy. The hammer itself only weighs about 2,000 pounds, maybe a little bit more on the steel pallet that it's on. And so I wasn't maxing out the towing capacity. It's just not geared for towing long distances or for towing at all. So after a couple days of hanging out and forging with Ben, I lit out, started to head north again, finally back into the Rocky Mountains. I passed through Amarillo, Texas, the Panhandle of Oklahoma, and all of eastern Colorado, which was way prettier than I thought it was going to be, and crashed that night at the house and shop of Jim Rodabaugh. Jim is a master bladesmith, and he's the head judge for the ABS this year, and we got to talk about shooting and hunting and knives. We talked for a long time, and I just had an absolute blast. I had met Jim a couple times before, but it was great to get to know him a little bit better, and it was very kind of him and his wife Maria to open up their home to me. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting to bring you guys along and maybe do some work with Jim here in the future. And that was my last night on the road. I lit out the next morning from the very southeast corner of Wyoming and started to head north. I kicked off the day with the worst cup of coffee I've ever had in my entire life from a gas station near there. It was truly atrocious. It kind of tasted like they had taken rainwater from a 55-gallon bucket out back, boiled some burnt green beans in it, and then served it. I can't articulate how bad it was. Anyway, I made it with only a few stops. My only stop of any time was at Kevin Willie's shop. Kevin is the power hammer guru of just about everything, but for especially Beaudry's. And so we kind of learned a couple cool things about this hammer that I'll explain to you guys in just a minute. But after that, I finally made it home with nothing too catastrophic happening. The trailer didn't completely break. Made it home late, 9:30 at night after a full 12.5-hour day on the road. And that was the end of my 15-day road trip to get to hang out with knife makers and pick up this power hammer. With that, let me tell you a little bit about this hammer. So the Beaudry company was established in the 1880s, and the patent for this particular hammer, the Champion hammer, the first patent was granted on September 25th, 1894, and the second patent on September 3rd, 1895. Beaudry's are pretty widely regarded to be the finest mechanical hammers out there, with a very, very wide range of stock that they can accommodate, which is uncommon for mechanical hammers. They also have a very elasticy, whippy blow that comes from their unique linkage design. The two spring arms inside of the ram and the elliptical shape in there with the rollers makes a very powerful mechanical design. This particular hammer, Kevin Willie estimates, is built around 1918. He didn't say why, but he knows better than anybody, which makes it 6 years older than my big number 11, as that was built in 1924. Now this hammer differs from the number 11 in a couple of ways. The two big ways, well, other than the fact that it's way smaller, but it doesn't have a separated anvil. It's a single piece hammer, so the anvil doesn't fall through. It's keyed into the frame right here. So essentially, rather than having a separate anvil, it has a really tall sow block. Performance-wise, I'm not sure how much it affects it to have it be the same piece. I don't think it's going to affect it really at all. The other big thing, and this is the really big one, is that this is a clutch model. So it was originally made to be driven by a motor, not from a slack belt or a line shaft from up above like the big hammer is. Almost like the Little Giant, it has a clutch system in the main rear flywheel here, which allows for a motor to be mounted on the frame. There's another secondary motor thing here, but originally this piece wasn't here, and it would mount directly onto this piece of cast iron. This piece was machined and then leveled to the frame, and then they have lead melted in there to keep it dead flat and flush to the frame, which means that if I mount a motor to this plate right here, it will be perfectly concentric to the wheel up here. And so as you step down on the treadle, much like the Little Giant, right now it's frozen together, but much like the Little Giant, so this piece in the back is always spinning. It's separate from this part of the lip right there, and this chunk is connected to the shaft, which is connected to the linkage in the front of the crank right there. And so as you step down, those two mate and they start spinning together, and much like the big hammer, as you step down as well, the brake lets off of the pressure from this part, and that allows it to start getting going. So there's a lot of things that I'm really excited about this hammer. For one, its compact size. It is a very small footprint. It's about 2.5 feet wide and about 40 inches long, so 3.5 feet long. As you can probably tell, if I were to just mount it on the ground, it would probably be a little bit low. No one wants to be forging down like that, right? And so the way that I'll be able to build a good foundation for it, as well as lift it up, is to build a steel box and to fill that with concrete. I'll be able to cast pockets into that foundation for the bolts to go into, which will be very easy, and that'll bring it up to a nice height and give it a good inertial mass underneath the hammer to help it perform a little bit better. That'll also make it easier to mount into the concrete, and it'll mean that if I ever need to, I'll be able to move it around, which is a big plus. And for one thing, the whole hammer is crusty with the capital K. The key down here looks good. These keys here look like they're gonna need some work. I don't like the double key shim system. I like to have one key, maybe one shim. The dies look pretty decent. They're a little bit chipped out over here, but I might just make them a little bit shorter. That'll be an easy thing to figure out what to do, but I like how big they are for how small the hammer is. They're about 3.5 by about 6 inches long or 7 inches long, which is awesome. I love big flat dies, and these actually do have a little bit of a crown to them, so they're not dead flat. They're like a little bit bowed, which I might keep it like that because I do have the big hammer and the press for getting things dead flat, and so having something with a little bit of crown to it might be kind of nice. Continuing down low, the treadle system looks great. The treadle is original, and the links on both sides are also original, and they look awesome. And then moving up from the dies, we have the ram, and the ram looks awesome. The dies look beautiful. I don't see any cracks. I don't see anything wrong with it. There's a few casting flaws in it, but I'm not worried about that at all. It's just an extra place to store oil inside there. It's perfect. The inside of the ram has a little bit of tracking in it, but really not a whole lot. Just a very small amount, and I think that's great. Just like the big hammer, it's got a nice smooth finish on the front of it, and then rough shaper marks on the back, which I think is hilarious. They're like, we'll finish the presentation side good, and we'll just, who cares about the back? So far we haven't had any big problems with the hammer, but we're gonna change that and talk about spring arm number 1 right here. It has been broken several times, it looks like, over the years, at least twice, maybe 3 times. I see two big lines of weld right there, and then a third one from a different age. Very clearly. So this is obviously the older one, and then the newer one is on top and is shinier. So I'm going to need to forge a new set of spring arms. Thankfully, I have a giant Beaudry and a press and the right kind of steel to do this. My friend Dave Tuthill, Firehorse Forge, gave me a bar of 1 inch thick, 4 inch wide by about 4 foot long, 5160, which is the spring steel just about. I'll also need to turn a couple new rollers. These ones are awful tired. You see we've got these fun little flanges on the end there. That's not supposed to be there. That's from it wearing and abrading against the seat of it right there. And so that ain't how it's supposed to be. Shouldn't be too hard to find 52-100 in kind of the right shape for that. Worst case scenario, I can forge some up. It'll be all right. But that's going to be, I think, the most time-intensive remaking manufacturing process for the hammer. Moving on up, we get to our spring box assembly. And so this is the arms sit in here, and that's what obviously the ram hangs off of. And inside it, we've got our pitman with the rat tail gear heading down, and this thing looks complete. I don't see any cracks. That being said, there's a lot of paint on it. but it's not a super big deal if there is, because these things are solid steel. Good job, Beaudry, for thinking ahead. So many power hammers have so many cast iron parts that you can't really weld, that it's really nice to have a hammer that has a lot of steel parts on it, so that if something does seriously go wrong, you can weld it not easily, but a lot easier than doing cast iron. So this looks good. It'll need to get freed up. These are pretty well chewed in there. There's some pipe wrench marks around the outside of these fine thread tension set screws here. Those will need to be cleaned up. But pretty much everything else here looks pretty nice. It's kind of ridiculous. And then moving up even farther, we've got the interface from our pitman and spring box to the actual crank disc of the hammer. So this guy sits right here. Sits inside there. Big old nut sits on the end there. The pitman slips over right there, and that is what hangs everything together. And these guys both look pretty dang good as well. This is also solid bronze, whereas on the big hammer, again, it's actually sleeved. But this one's solid bronze, and it looks great. I don't see any cracks. The threading here looks really nice. It's a little bit goopy, but what do you expect from a goopy old power hammer? And so then moving on, we've got our crank disc, and this looks great. There's actually still a little bit of raw, unrusted steel in there. That's pretty cool. Not a whole lot to talk about here, but this area looks good. It's not chipped out at all. It hasn't been abused, which is awesome. And so this crank disc here is connected to the main shaft that runs through the frame up here, and that is what's connected to this part of the clutch flywheel assembly, and it all looks pretty nice. Well, actually, it looks terrible. It's so crusty and gross up here, but it's very greasy, which is a great thing because that means that we probably don't have any corrosion on the inside of this clutch and bearing assembly. And when I say there's grease, I mean there's grease. So this is our bearing assembly. It all looks fantastic. The castings look clean. The pieces look good. Visually, they look like absolute garbage, but that's all right. It's all gonna work out okay. And actually, the brake is still tension. It's funny, you can't see it moving right now. But if you try to move the main wheel right now, it doesn't want to move. But then you step down, and that brake releases its tension, and lo and behold, you can move that sucker. I just found out for the first time. I played with this hammer a lot. But if it does have the brake on, then the main part of that flywheel assembly, the part that's always spinning, is capable of moving right now. So as you step down on the treadle, you can see that piece moving, and that's part of the clutch that brings friction between the two main pieces of it. Surrounding all of this is a very well-built, surprisingly heavy-duty built guard for the belt. I'm going to take this off. This is probably an OSHA thing. In all reality, it makes sense to have a guard on this belt. This is a piece that's constantly spinning. It would be very easy to walk into, but I'm really the only one who works in my shop, and I don't like how it looks. I want that belt to be open and hazardous. So the internal linkage from the treadle, that's this piece in here. Everything inside the hammer, which is really just a couple little turnbuckles and kind of linkage pieces, that all looks brand new, perfect, wonderful. This piece right here is actually a forged piece that came out of the Beaudry factory. I think that's neat as all get out. So we've got these pieces here that go from the other side of that linkage on up, and on the big hammer that goes to the pulley that tightens the slack belt, and on here it goes to the clutch mechanism, and these pieces are unoriginal. They look heavily built, they look like they're doing the job just fine, so I might clean them up, make them look a little bit prettier, but overall I'll probably just about leave them alone. So a couple of the cool, maybe more historical facts about this hammer is that all of the Beaudry literature says that the number 2 is a 50-pound power hammer. So as 50 pounds as 50 pounds can get, right? But what you have to think about is that in the late 1800s and kind of all the way up to the late 1920s, the Great Depression, there was quite a few power hammer manufacturers, probably close to 200 or 300 in America, making mechanical hammers. They were making hammers for farmers and for town blacksmiths and for everybody. Everyone needed forged parts on everything at that time. And so there was a massive amount of competition in the mechanical power hammer market right in the turn of the century. And so what manufacturers would do is they would say, hey, this is a 50-pound hammer. And then they would do things like make the actual falling weight 94 pounds, which is what this one weighed in at. I think that's so funny that, granted, that's with the dies, but these dies can't weigh more than 10, 15 pounds. And so what a cool way to be like, hey, my 50-pound hammer hits twice as hard as your 50-pound hammer, and have it be true, but also in reality, this is a nearly 100-pound power hammer, which I think is so funny. And then another neat little bit of history that, that Kevin Willey actually figured out what was going on, and something that I was kind of bummed about, is that the raised cast lettering on the side of the hammer, I think that's one of my favorite parts of mechanical hammers, is the raised lettering. I think it looks so good. It's a cool piece of the history. And on this one, it's gone. And I saw it, and it wasn't a deal breaker for me, but it was a bit of a bummer. And then when I was at Kevin Willey's, he was sitting there looking at it, and the nameplate for it, the little tag that has the serial number and has the patents on it and whatnot, that's missing as well. That traditionally would have sat about right here. And I do have a remake that I'm gonna make for it. So Kevin was looking at it, and he sees this little bit of a conduit holder right there. And since this originally ran off of a motor, what he kind of deduced is that they probably ran a piece of conduit and chiseled off the letters off of the frame of the hammer, and you can see that there's a couple of extra tapped holes in the frame there. So what we think happened is that they ran conduit there and put their electrical start-stop switch right there. And they're like, you know what, this is the right spot for it. Chisel off those letters, slap that sucker to the frame, which is just so unbelievably ridiculous. I'm heated. That's so dumb. It is what it is. They did it. It's a cool part of the history of the hammer. It kind of shows the go-getter, purely utilitarian aspect of the original owners of this hammer. This thing was there to make money. They didn't care about the cool raised lettering on the side. They wanted it to have a convenient place for the start-stop switch. I myself will probably run it around and have a cool old switch sit on the side of the frame right here. I think that's going to be a good spot for it. In fact, there's already a couple holes here that I'll be able to use, and I won't have to touch the frame at all. It'll stay all original, but I just think that's a hilarious part of the actual history of the hammer. So I'm thrilled to have gotten the chance to buy this. Andrew, thank you so much for selling it to me and for being super gracious and allowing me to slowly pay it off and take a year and a half to come pick it up. And so it'll probably still be a couple months before I'm able to get to this hammer. I have some projects that I'm working on in the shop that I need to get to first. And before I forge those arms, I need to get a coal forge. I bought a coal forge that is also very cool, and it's going to need some work to get up and running, believe it or not. Probably late this summer I'll get to move on to getting this hammer up and running. It's going to fill kind of a nice gap in my shop right now. I've got the 25-pound Little Giant, I've got the 400-pound Beaudry, and I've got the hydraulic forging press, and this is going to be a really nice intermediary hammer. It's 4 times the size of the Little Giant, and it's 1/4 the size of the big hammer, and so it'll be really nice for kind of the mid-range of quick forging projects that I want to do. So drawing out tong reins, forging stock from nothing all the way up to about probably 1.5 inch stock is kind of where it'll sit. So I feel very honored to get to be a steward of this machine, and I am really looking forward to chipping off all of this awful paint and getting all that crusty grease out of there. It's gonna be satisfying as all get out. Thank you guys so much for following along, and thank you to Factor for sponsoring today's episode. They're a seriously cool company, and it's very, very handy to have meals ready to go on the go. These shirts are on the website. It is a shirt of the first knife that I made in this workshop, which is this big old ironwood Bowie. And I have these guys in a couple different colors, green, red, and black. Super comfortable. I just switched to a different kind of shirt that's a little bit heavier, and I like it more. So make sure to go check those out. Link will be down in the description down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We're getting close to that 250,000 subscriber mark where I'm going to give away a Damascus chef's knife. So if you want to be included in that, drop a subscribe. And also hit the notifications button. I don't know if we get throttled at all. Probably not. Maybe though. We talk about knives. Hear that, YouTube? Promote the video, please. Come on, algorithm. Alrighty, with that, I'll see you guys on the next one. Goodbye.